Are we concerned about the thermal performance? No, not really. Oh no, a powerful pocket computer doing powerful pocket computer things can run hot sometimes. Eee. Let's break this down. There is nothing average consumer about higher resolution, high frame rate video. 4K 60, 4K 120. Those are video modes selected for very specific uses. This is extreme data processing for a pocketable battery-powered device, and are features still often found only on premium standalone camera bodies. It's not good enough to take a phone out and then shoot on it until you get a warning and then complain. Oh, it's summer and the camera shut off after minutes of recording. That's what it should do. What we need to see is how long it can record and compare that fairly. Compare that consistently to other phones to get some idea of performance. Thermal testing is as complicated as battery testing. If you just casually point a camera and shoot, it's impossible to perfectly replicate the exact data, radio, screen, and temperature conditions shooting phones individually. So if we're looking at the impact of camera performance, we kind of need to isolate the camera. But that means we're likely using a phone in a more specific way than folks usually shoot casual little video clips. But if we're going to compare, we need to compare consistently and do our best controlling for those differences. Same day, same conditions, similar screen and radio settings, the same apps installed and updating. It's a lot more complicated than just point and shoot and time. This also gives us better data on how to maximize the use of our phone cameras, but I'll cover that a bit more at the end of this video. I set up 2 grueling video tests, one outdoors recording at 4K 60, one indoors recording at 4K 120. So starting with the outdoors at 4K 60, I waited until later afternoon for a more shaded location on my back porch. This was the week before we hit that crazy heat wave here in Los Angeles. Ground temperature was around 96 degrees Fahrenheit, and I tried to give each phone about the same amount of clearance, pointing roughly at the same patch of dead plants in our backyard planter. I do not have a green thumb. Wi-Fi was kept on, but cell radios were turned off. Screens were set to roughly 300 lux by my old camera meter. The contestants were the Sony Xperia 5 IV, the Pixel 6a, and the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. That gives us a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, a Google Tensor, and a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. So we push record, and we wait. The Google Tensor tapped out first at 7 minutes and 29 seconds. The Sony posted a thermal warning at 8 minutes and 24 seconds and kept recording until it shut off at 13 minutes and 42 seconds. And the Xiaomi recorded for well over 20 minutes before I just turned the camera off. I feel 20 minutes of 4K 60 in high 90-degree heat is plenty. These are challenging conditions, and this is heavy lifting camera work, and I also didn't want to be outside all that time, so it's very encouraging to see some power efficiency improvements on the Xiaomi with the 8 Plus Gen 1, but there is a catch for the 12S Ultra, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we analyze these clips. Next up, moving indoors, we're controlling the temperature a little better, but my office still hits high 70s, low 80s in the late afternoon. On the day I tested, interior wall temperatures were almost perfectly at 80 degrees. Same rules, we have the Wi-Fi on, cell radio off, same apps and services, screen brightness set to roughly 300 lux. Only now, we're testing phones that natively support 4K at 120 frames per second. Our contestants for this test, again, the Sony Xperia 5 IV, but now pitting it up against an Axon 40 Ultra, the OnePlus 10 Pro, and the OnePlus 9 Pro. This gives us 3 phones with Snapdragon 8 Gen 1s and 1 phone with a Snapdragon 888. A brief aside, we can argue about third-party camera apps that support 4K 120, but I've never found great consistent experiences with Filmic shooting 4K 120. The processor, the ISP, and the camera sensor all need to clear that data for stable video recording. And sometimes it works great, sometimes it's a crash fest, sometimes the clips are super laggy. If a manufacturer includes 4K 120 natively in their camera app, they're making a claim that the feature is legitimately ready to use reliably. This test is also complicated by the fact that OnePlus puts a 5-minute limit on 4K 120 recordings and has a clever trick where it will turn the screen off on longer takes to help the phone run cooler. To be fair to the other two phones, I also cycled around 5 minutes to give them the same kind of break while I was tapping the screens on the OnePluses to keep the displays lit up. Now here, the Sony doesn't seem to perform as well. It completed one 5-minute cycle, then ran for another 2 minutes and 38 seconds before shutting the clip off. Almost 8 minutes of 4K 120, that's actually pretty cool, but the OnePluses ran for 5 consecutive cycles. While I never got an official on-screen thermal warning, occasionally you'd see both OnePlus phones dim the screen brightness without completely shutting the screen off. They were definitely running hot. The Axon, the ZTE, was the surprising longevity champ of the lot. It ran the first 4 cycles with the OnePluses, and for cycle 5, I just wanted to see how long it would keep recording a single clip. It captured a single video file running 23 minutes and 56 seconds. Looks really impressive. It's a single clip of video, a 26 gigabyte file. The phone can't play it properly on the built-in camera gallery app and it crashes. Other players like VLC if you try to scrub it, but you can still edit that in Power Director, sort of. Before we even get into the analysis, I gotta give ZTE a pretty healthy nod on that performance. So how do we interpret these results? We've got to be specific about recommending the right tool for the right job, and changing one feature or one data point in a test can have a huge impact on real-world performance. The clip I have from the Xiaomi shooting 4K 60 and the Axon shooting 4K 120 look really impressive for the length of time they can record. But digging into the file data, some weird stuff starts happening. For our outdoor test, the Xiaomi didn't really save a 60 frame per second video. The video reads as a 45 frame per second clip. Still looks smoother than 30 frames per second, but the Xiaomi is working 25% less hard than a phone recording a proper 60 FPS. Happily, there were almost no dropped frames on any of the phones shooting in the outdoor test. But I kind of feel the Xiaomi was cheating. Just a little bit. The Pixel actually looks like more of a champ for being so cheap and keeping a consistent 60 FPS with practically no detectable dropped frames. Ditto, the Sony, you asked for 60 frames per second, you get 60 frames per second. Now, wouldn't you believe it, when we move indoors, the story is kind of the same. The OnePluses and the Axon look more impressive, and what they actually accomplish is impressive. I don't want to diminish the incredible capabilities of our phones, but the Sony is playing at a different tier. Right around where the Sony had already stopped a clip mid-cycle, the Axon says it's shooting 4K 120, but frame rates dip as low as 105 frames per second in VLC, and when I look at the video file in my video editing software. The OnePlus 9 Pro also does not keep a consistent 120, with the last clip reading as 102 frames per second in my video editing software. The OnePlus 10 Pro does a better job. Later clips still show as 120, but both the 9 and the 10 are dropping more frames than the Sony when we're looking at similar recording times. Those later clips for the Axon and the OnePluses, we see even more dropped frames. This isn't an exact science what I'm doing here, but looking at these clips and trying to edit them, we see a consistent trend. When Sony says you're shooting 60 or 120, Sony will drive that camera way more consistently at that frame rate until the phone just can't handle it, rather than let the frame rate drop and still drop frames on top of that. The Xperia is just going to cancel the clip, and I think that's what a pro would want. These are extreme clips to shoot, and people aren't casually shooting 4K 120 on their phones. So when people complain that a Sony is giving you a thermal warning and is starting to shut off other phone features, I think they sound kind of dumb. You told the camera to shoot 4K 60 or 4K 120, and the phone is doing exactly what you told it to do to the best of its ability. You're in the camera app, so other parts of the phone must be less important, and to maintain the camera performance, it's shutting other things down. Now, you also said you wanted high frame rate, which means you must want a consistent high frame rate. You own a Sony, so you must know what you want. When the phone is no longer able to sustain what you asked it to do, it's not going to try and fake it. It's going to shut the clip off. When we really hold a pocket computer to those standards, though, we have to expect that the limits for recording are going to be significantly shorter than on phones that change up the frame rate or allow for more errors in recording. If your recording consistency isn't mission critical, then a phone like the Axon turns out to be an astounding performer. If dropping frames or changing the frame rate would harm your project, though, I have to give Google and Sony a lot of credit for delivering a more pro-tier style of recording. And if we want to take this data and really apply it to more real-world use, we can make some assumptions, and then we can make some recommendations. The more casual shooter is going to see shorter recording times than what I demonstrated here. Your screen brightness on auto is going to hit your battery harder. It's going to generate more heat. Your cell radio is going to draw more power and generate more heat. Higher battery use is going to generate more heat and reduce recording time. If the ambient temperature around you is higher than 90 degrees Fahrenheit, these phones really can't passively cool well. The temperature on the screens outdoors was starting to hit 120 degrees. Even though the air temperature was likely 25 degrees cooler, that heat just soaks. So what can we learn from all of these phones? I think OnePlus has the right idea. The more we can manage the screens, reduce brightness, or turn screens off altogether, the longer we can record higher frame rate footage. And I would highly recommend against using a case in hot weather, anything which might act as a further soak, trapping more heat close to the phone. Then you just have to ask yourself what's really important. Do you really care about the video? I just took it for granted that other nerds would flip to airplane mode to take some stress off the phone, but apparently that's far less common than I thought it might be. If the clip matters to you, you'll want fewer distractions from notifications, and you'll want more thermal and battery buffer to shoot before and after the moment you really care about. But what I don't see is an outright deal breaker problem with phones like the Pixel or the Xperia. I do wish both could be built with beefier internals for thermal management, but in practice, I can drive both surprisingly hard with just a little management of other aspects of the phone. And I trust both significantly more that when I shoot a clip, it's going to shoot the clip I asked it to shoot. If I want 60 frames per second, I'm gonna be kinda salty if I get a 45 frame per second clip instead. If I want 4K 120 so I can capture a beautiful 4:1 slow motion shot in higher resolution, that slow motion edit won't look as good if the camera is dropping down to 105 frames per second. I'm gonna be real salty if the phone doesn't alert me that the performance is starting to degrade. I'm not gonna be impressed that it ran a super long clip if I really can't use that super long clip, especially if I shot out at a location that I can't easily get back to, or if I shot with resources I can't easily recreate. So when other phone reviewers, they just take a phone out and they shoot a long clip and only look at the total recording time, we're talking about two completely different tiers of performance. I want a camera that will lock in the frame rate better and will give me a solid warning well before my clips are starting to degrade. I want a phone that will prioritize the camera above my cell phone radio and social media notifications. I am not average. I'll never understand the tech enthusiasts that seem to want to be basic when we're also talking about spending $1,000 or more on a phone, but I digress. Sonys are very specific kinds of phones. If you want what a Sony can do, if you want what makes a Sony special, it means having to balance different compromises than other phones. Every phone has compromises. Given the state of powerful SoCs and demanding camera capabilities, you have to go into a Sony purchase knowing your outright recording limits, especially at the high end, are going to be shorter. But no other phone is playing quite the same game. And if you don't need that kind of power or consistency in a camera, you have plenty of other options to choose. That's where we're gonna wrap this up. You can always drop me some extra questions or comments down below just to keep up the conversation if there's anything you're curious about with high-end camera capabilities on our pocket computers. As always, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these videos, and subscribing to the channel. All the support lately has been phenomenal. Those of you clicking the links down in the description, if you're hitting up my home site, SomeGadgetGuy.com, or if you're joining the list of names scrolling by on your screen from my Patreon, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. This list is the coolest collection of tech pals in the universe, and they often get sneak peeks on the camera testing and performance testing that I like to do, so maybe you should check them out. Could be good times. You know where you can find me around the rest of the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters and the Twitch. I revived my Flickr account, sort of. Not so much on the Facebooks or the Instagrams, and I will catch you all on the next video.